Welcome to BFN channel.
I am admin of Duniafana News as an observer this time. I would like to review the uniqueness of Indonesian and Malaysian Chinese. Indonesian and Malaysian Chinese are two ethnic groups originating from mainland China but growing and developing with different identities, but each has something in common in making a positive contribution to the progress of Indonesia and Malaysia. Chinese in Malaysia grow and develop into a strong entity by forming a community of Chinese in Malaysia because it has a population that is large enough to create a population composition with a percentage of around 22% of the entire population in Malaysia, which amounts to around 32 million people. Meanwhile, Chinese in Indonesia grow and develop with a smaller population composition with a percentage of around 5% of the total Indonesian population of around 270 million people. In this world there are names called the nation of Indonesia, the nation of Japan, the nation of China, etc. But why don't Malaysians like to be called the Malaysian nation? Because Malaysia has three dominant ethnic groups, namely the Malays, Chinese and Indians. So with the very dominant composition of these three nations, they object to being called Malaysians, but they are more proud to be called Malaysians. Malaysian Chinese formed a single nation called the Malaysian Chinese nation, which still has a strong Chinese identity, starting with personal names, still using the original names of their ancestral origins in mainland China. In daily communication among the Chinese community they also use their native Chinese language, namely Mandarin, and then when communicating with Malays and Indians they will use a mixture of English and Malay. In the educational path of the Chinese nation, Malaysia also has a special school for the Chinese nation with the language of instruction for the teaching and learning process using Mandarin and Malay. Even so, the Malays and Indians are also allowed to enter the schools of the Chinese Malaysians. In contrast to the Chinese in Indonesia, whose percentage is small, they are more easily assimilated perfectly, both culturally and by marriage, with hundreds of other ethnic groups in Indonesia, which then become an integral part of the Indonesian nation with one unified language, namely Indonesian. Chinese in Indonesia no longer use Chinese names but have blended in using distinctive names in each region in Indonesia. Chinese Indonesians are generally no longer able to speak Mandarin, but they are fluent in the local language where they live, besides of course being fluent in Indonesian. Even in schools, Indonesian Chinese have also blended in public schools owned by the private sector and the state. One other unique difference is that the Malaysian Chinese are proud to be called Chinese, while Indonesian Chinese will object and even be offended if they are called Chinese because they already feel that they are an inseparable part of the Indonesian nation. Even though they grow up with distinct and different identities, Indonesian and Malaysian Chinese have one characteristic in common, namely making a positive contribution to increasing prosperity and economic progress in the two neighboring sister countries. In fact, not only that, Chinese Indonesians and Malaysians also have great abilities and achieve world-class achievements in the field of sports, especially badminton, so that the names of the two neighboring countries are proud in the eyes of the world.